Hey everyone. So, we all think we know the story of capitalism, right? It's this tale of markets and industry that started in Europe and then, just spread out everywhere. But what if that whole story is missing the main character? What if the real engine of capitalism has been hiding in plain sight this whole time? Okay, let's get into it. The story we're usually told goes something like this. It breaks down into four neat stages. You've got mercantile capitalism, then liberal free market capitalism, then you get the big welfare states with state-managed capitalism, and then, well, you get to today with our financialized global system. It all sounds pretty straightforward, right? A nice, clean timeline.
But here's the thing, and this is really the core of what we're digging into. Based on the work of scholar Gurminder K. Bhambra, what if that familiar story has completely left out the most important character? What if we've been watching the supporting actors this whole time, while the star of the show has been completely ignored?
And here it is, the big idea we're going to unpack. The argument is that colonialism wasn't just some sideshow that was happening while capitalism was rising. It wasn't a bug, it was the feature. It was the absolute foundation, the central logic. It was the main event that made the whole system possible in the first place.
So here's how we're going to do this. First, we'll quickly go over that standard story we all know. And then we're going to take it apart, stage by stage. We'll look at the real colonial foundations, the imperial economy that came next, how that whole thing actually funded the welfare state, and finally, what all this hidden history means for us right now.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1, Capitalism's Standard Story. Or, the tale we're always told.
So this is the timeline you probably saw in a textbook somewhere. It's how capitalism is usually explained, even by people who are critical of it. And the key idea here is that the whole system sort of grew up inside Europe, all on its own. Colonialism gets a mention, sure, but it's treated as something happening over there, like plunder, an external thing separate from the real story happening back home. Okay, on to section 2. Now this is where we start to flip the script. We're going back to that very first stage, and we're not just re-examining it, we're rewriting it. This isn't about mercantile capitalism, it's about its colonial foundations. Now this slide, this really lays it all out, doesn't it? The standard view says, let's focus on European markets, on luxury goods. But Bramber's view says, nope, the real story is the seizure of land in the Americas and the enslavement of African people. It pulls the camera back and shows that the origins aren't inside Europe at all. They're rooted in these violent global connections. So the foundation wasn't just trading some spices and textiles. It was built on the theft of inhabited, cultivated land across the Americas. It was built on the violent removal of the people who lived there. It was built on the enslavement of millions of Africans who were treated as literal property. And it was built on extracting resources like silver, which was then used to muscle into trade with Asia. That's the real foundation. And this quote from Bhambra just hits so hard. See, the standard theory says land and labor weren't really commodities yet in this early stage. But Bhambra just asks, what could possibly be more of a commodity than a human being who is bought and sold? It totally flips the logic on its head and challenges the very definition of where capitalism begins. So if the foundation is completely different, what about what came next? Well, that brings us to Section 3, the imperial economy. And here, we're going to poke some serious holes in the whole idea of a liberal capitalism. The old story talks about nation-states that just happen to have empires on the side. But the argument here is that we should see them as imperial states. Now, this might sound like just a change in words, but it's a huge shift. It means the colonies weren't a foreign policy issue, they were run like domestic business. For Britain, colonial issues were handled by the Home Office, not the Foreign Office. This drags the colonies from the edge of the story right into the center of the economy. And one of the main ways this worked was through something called colonial drain. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It's the system of taking all the tax money raised in a colony, say India, and instead of using it to build things in India, that wealth was just vacuumed up and sent straight to London for Britain to use. And we are not talking about small amounts of money here. Just look at this. In a single year, 1856, the official wealth transferred from India to the UK was £3.5 million. In today's money, that's more than £350 million. In 1 year. And that doesn't even count all the private fortunes being made. And it just kept growing. By the 1930s, that drain had exploded to £50 million a year. That's the equivalent of over £3.2 billion today, every single year. This wasn't just pocket change. This was the capital that was funding Britain's industrial power and its investments all over the world.
Okay, section 4. And this is where the story might start to hit a little closer to home for a lot of us. We're talking about the welfare engine, and we have to ask a tough question. Who actually paid for it?
Look, the idea of the welfare state is built on this really powerful concept that the wealth of a nation belongs to its people and should be used to take care of them. But Bhambra forces us to pause and ask a really critical follow-up question. Where did all that national wealth come from in the first place? This slide, this is pretty staggering. This is Britain's financial situation right after World War II, the exact moment the modern welfare state and the National Health Service are being created. And look at who held Britain's debt. India was its single largest creditor, holding almost 36% of it. That's more than the United States. Let that sink in.
So Britain owed its colony a massive amount of money. How did it deal with it? Well, not by paying it back fairly. The source here points out 3 key moves. First, India was basically forced to give loans at super low interest rates. Second, it was denied the kind of financial protections that other whiter parts of the empire got. And then, and this is the kicker, in 1949, Britain just devalued its own currency, and poof, a third of the debt it owed to India was just gone.
And all of this brings us to our final section, today's legacy. Because this isn't just about the past. This hidden history is crucial for understanding the world we are living in right now.
Think about the debates over the crisis of the welfare state. The standard story you often hear is that it was undermined by identity politics, movements for racial equality and feminism that supposedly broke up working-class unity. But Bramber's views suggest the problem came from the other direction. The crisis wasn't caused by demands for inclusion, it was caused by the welfare state's failure to ever truly include everyone on equal terms.
So what does this all boil down to? 3 big things. First, the wealth we call national wealth was never just national. It was generated through a global colonial system. Second, the massive inequalities we see today between countries aren't some accident of geography. They're a direct legacy of this history of extraction. And third, it means that our current arguments about things like migration, foreign aid, and who owes what to whom, they're completely missing the point if they ignore this history. And that leaves us with one final, huge question to think about. If the wealth that built our modern world wasn't really created in these neat little national boxes, but was generated through a global system of exploitation, then what does justice, what does fairness actually look like on a global scale today?